This episode is brought to you by Twizzlers. Long day, late night, feeling a little bored? Twizzlers is the ultimate sidekick for any moment of the day, no matter what kind of day you're having. The perfect level of sweet and a fun excuse to sit back and relax. Unwind with Twizzlers. To buy now, visit Hersheyland.com/Twizzlers.
Really, the way I became involved in this was started out in the early afternoon, around probably 1:30 in the afternoon. And I received a telephone call from the mortuary officer out at the Walker Air Force Base. He was inquiring about what would be the smallest possible casket that we could get that would be hermetically sealed. That was the first contact that I had with the base. Then he called back, probably 45 minutes or so later. And he said, I need to ask you some more questions. He said, in case something like this should happen, he said, we need to know what the preparation, what your preparations are for the bodies that had been laying out in the elements, you know. He said, we need to know also if your treatments of the bodies are the remains, what could you do to them? And if your treatments, would it change any of the chemical breakdown of the tissues, the blood? Would it make a difference? And I said, I thought probably it would. So that's when I explained to him that we would have the vats that we would fill up with formaldehyde solution with water. And we put the bodies in them, let them stay there for 24 hours and then take them out. And then we would pack the bodies in, would be a sawdust and really a lime, what we would pack them in, then wrap them in the plastic. That's bodies that were badly decomposed. If there was tissue, deep tissue, we would have to do it hypodermically with needles to get to the deep tissue. Then we would have to aspirate the cavities if the cavities hadn't already ruptured, and then put some cavity fluid in those. I said that's, kind of normal procedure. Usually where I parked, there was 3 field ambulances parked in the area where I usually park, where we back up to the ramps. So I just pulled up to the side in front of those and parked out in front, and the airman and I got out and walked in. When I got up, went up the steps and up the ramp, and I was walking, going into the emergency room, I noticed that the doors were open, but what was odd about it, there was an MP standing beside each one of the vehicles in the back, standing there. And the doors were open. Naturally, I was curious, and, I just happened to look in. That's when I saw some debris that looked like parts of a plane or something that they hadn't had a crash. Because I've seen them do this a lot of times, bring in pieces in the old ambulances in. I noticed in 2 of the ambulances there was some debris that was probably 2.5 to 3 feet, long and probably high, that was propped up on the side of the ambulance there. They were kind of in the shape of maybe like a half a canoe. They were like the front part of a canoe. And it looked like it might be aluminum, but it looked more like the metal looked more like stainless steel that had been heated. It was blue, kind of a bluish tint to it. What was odd about it, it looked like around the curved part in the front of the canoe, there was some designs or something. It kind of reminded me of maybe some Egyptian signs or whatever. And it was probably about 3 inches in high, and probably the length of what the wreckage I saw, it looked like it was the length. And the same thing was in the other ambulance too. I mean, I saw practically the same thing. the pieces that were practically the same size and the insignias looked like whatever that might be was part of the wreckage. Well, I didn't know really until the next day. I called out. I kept trying to get a hold of her because naturally I was curious and I wanted to know what was going on. And so I called out the next day, and then probably around 11:30, she said, "I know you've been trying to get a hold of me, but I haven't been available." And she said, "Why don't you meet me at the officers club? If you have time, meet at the officers club and we'll have lunch, and I want to talk to you." So I went on out and met her. She looked like she was, in shock is what she really talked like and looked like. And I said, "Well, I was just curious. The only reason I want to talk to you, I was curious on what happened." And she said, "Well, you won't believe it." And she says, "I don't believe it either." But then she pulled out of a little purse or little pocketbook, whatever she had there. She gave me a little diagram that she had drawn some figures of some arms and face and so on. She told me that this is what, was in those, that it was a crash. Wasn't an airplane, but they didn't know what it was at that time. She said, "We have 3 bodies." That there was 3 bodies. She said 2 of them were very mutilated. One looked like it might have walked out, or that it, might have lived a little while. And she explained they were like 3.5 feet to 4 feet tall. The 2 of the bodies were you couldn't identify much because they were practically destroyed, and it looked like maybe that they might have been a predatory animal or something might have been doing some damage on the bodies too. In the little drawings that I had, the way she explained it and the way she drew it, that the heads were somewhat larger than a human heads. The hands were long, no thumbs. It was just the long, very delicate fingers at the end on the underside at the tip of each fingers was a pad-like, maybe a little pad, but it looked like the skin had maybe little suction, like the little suction cups on those. On the, no fingernails on the hands. The head, the lips were just a long, narrow, more or less, not full lips like we would have in most of our people, but very fine lined, very fine lips. There was no teeth. That was the inside of the mouth. It was kind of like a gums. Maybe it was. She said to explain it. It was almost as hard as if it was rawhide. Maybe at that. The ears. There was only 2 small orifices on each side of the head, with looked like a couple of small lobes that might cover both of those, but there was not a protruding ear. And also that the nose, there was only 2 small orifices in the nose. There was really no nose that was convex. It was all just flush with the face. She would have to stop and drink water every once in a while, and also she never touched a meal. All the time we were talking in an hour and a half that we were there, she never touched a meal.
The history of our Earth is so different from what we can imagine.
Enjoy the journey.
The Smithsonian, if they found out about a large skeleton somewhere, was to go get it.
I'm going to assume at least one person is right, because if one person's right, it busts the paradigm.
It all goes back to the fallen cherub. And the problem with the modern day church, they have a very truncated view of the supernatural.
This backdrop that's just pregnant with all kinds of meaning associated with this Mount Hermon event.
Welcome to Blurry Creatures.
And this guy defects from the kingdom. That's a big deal.
Welcome back to Blurry Creatures. You just heard mortician W. Glenn Davis. He was an alleged first-hand witness to the events at the Roswell Army Air Force Hospital. He was there on a medical call for a different reason, but he got phone calls that day from the Air Force Base asking about little caskets. And then he kept calling back after he left with another medical emergency to his friend who worked there. And then they went out to lunch, and you heard him describe what she told him that she saw and she worked on at the Army Air Force Hospital. So, some chilling testimony about the events at Roswell. We appreciate you guys for listening to this podcast, sharing this podcast around. We're going to hop in today's interview with L.A. Marzulli talking about the Roswell crash, him going to the crash site, and some of the interesting things he found there. Once again, if you want to support the podcast and what we're doing, blurrycreatures.com/members. We got events coming up, several events this year already in the works. Members get tickets to those first, and events and all the other good stuff, as well as exclusive channels, over 50 unreleased episodes. So thank you so much for listening to this podcast. Hope you enjoyed this one with L.A. Marzulli. Let's tune in. Welcome back to Blurry Creatures. Today's guest, we have L.A. Marzulli in. L.A., welcome to the show. Thanks for coming back on the podcast. We talk a lot about aliens, UFOs, and all those things. And you've been making films for years, and you're an author also, and just world traveler, looking for all the weird, blurry stuff, as we say. You just released a film on Roswell, and we haven't talked about that in depth, so it'll be fun to talk about this. I know a little bit about it. I mean, you hear that's kind of where the deep state kind of kicks off, and all these people say that this is the event. This is the event that kind of took our government from sort of the surface government to the underground.
Hey, I want to say one couple things though before we get started on Roswell. LA, you're a bit of a legend when it comes to our show. You're part of our introduction. So if you're listening to the show and you listen to the introduction, LA has a soundbite, and I think we bring it up maybe once every 10 episodes, 20 episodes or so, that our first time that we interviewed you, you pulled a elongated skull out of a model or a replica out of a suitcase. And it was like, I think we were so new to the game. We're like, dude, LA's got like a briefcase with a skull in it, or, a model of a skull. And so it's really probably in my top 10 favorite memories, 200 plus episodes in was doing that. And honestly, like, you're a trailblazer in this space. You've been doing this for a very, very long time. The Trail of the Nephilim. You've got DVD series. You have been, as Nate said in the beginning, you've been all over the map, all over the world. You digging up evidence and being boots on the ground. You're great friends with a lot of the folks that show up on our show. Tim Alberino, also Karen Wilkinson, who we talked about pre-roll, who's been on the show, was part of your last film on abductions. Mm-hmm. You're out there tip of the spear, and you've been that way for a long time. So, I just want to thank you for us, because we get the opportunity to really kind of stand on your shoulders, and as you blaze a trail for people like Nate and I to have a show and a platform to talk about these things, disseminate this information. And we're really grateful for all of the work you put in, the work you do, and it's really an honor to be able to sit down with you. Considering your proverbial resume, if you will, in our space. You were doing it long before Nephilim was a hot thing in the 90s. Long before that became a thing, you were on the trail. But you're a filmmaker, and you've got a new film. It's on, as Nate just mentioned, it's on Roswell, and as he mentioned as well, we have that is the epicenter really for that kicks off things as far as the United States is concerned. And so I would love to dive in and have you talk a bit about the film and your research, and the things that we should know, because of course there's a narrative out there, and we all know that, right? That and you're going to get into this, but there's a story, and then there's a cover-up story, and then there's a narrative, and of course in this day and age when you have fact checkers and debunkers, a lot of folks would say this whole thing has been debunked, but
It
hasn't been. It's far from that. As we said offhanded, people have pieces of the wreckage allegedly out there, maybe allegedly, or have had in the past. And so nobody really cares if you got pieces of a weather balloon, I don't think.
No, nobody cares at all.
Yeah, if it's something else, they do. So welcome back to the show, Ellie Marzulli.
Thanks,
great to have you.
Thanks. Really good to be here. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
We made 2 films on Roswell. And what was interesting about this, in 2016, I had interviewed a couple, Jim and Carolyn Rankin. It was actually in the very first film that I did outside of Watchers with Richard Shaw. And when I did the remake of it in 2020, I went back in and cut it from like an hour and 40 minutes down to about an hour and 5, hour and 10. And I took a lot out of it. I mean, just took a lot, snip, and tightened up the film. It was my first independent film, apart from Richard, as I just stated. So Jim and Carolyn was on Roswell, and I'll start there. They had one of their things that they're both pastors. So one of the things that they would do is people who were single, end of life, no family, they would kind of come in and handle the end of life procedure with assets, selling off different things, dispersing funds, all of that. And so Jim and Carolyn got very friendly with Colonel Hill.
This episode is brought to you by Twizzlers. Long day, late night, feeling a little bored? Twizzlers is the ultimate sidekick for any moment of the day, no matter what kind of day you're having. The perfect level of sweet and a fun excuse to sit back and relax. Unwind with Twizzlers. To buy now, visit Hersheyland.com/Twizzlers.
Colonel Hill was OSS, which is the forerunner of the CIA. Colonel Hill was an interrogator in World War II. He had 4 degrees. 4 degrees. Real smart guy. He's approaching 90 years old. Carolyn and Jim at this time had been with him well over a year. And for some reason, one thing led to another in a conversation. And Colonel Hill sitting in his chair with his head down like this. And Carolyn asked him, "What about Roswell?" Kind of out of the blue. And Colonel Hill looks at her and raises up his hand and goes, "What about it?" And Carolyn asked him, "Was it a weather balloon?" And he drops his head again as if, should I even go here? This is, in my opinion, this is the classic deathbed confession. He a month later, he's dead. He dies from, succumbs to the disease and old age and the whole 9 yards. And he said, no, it wasn't a weather balloon. And in the beginning of that testimony with Jim and Carolyn, Jim states, what you're about to hear is true. They both look right at the camera. So as a student of body language, first of all, they're pastors. Second of all, what are they gaining from this? Nothing monetarily. They're putting their reputation online. This was recorded in 2016 before we had the beginnings of disclosure. So they're coming forward with, in my opinion, with just a riveting, unbelievably credible testimony. And in that clip, in that interview with them, I flew to San Antonio and interviewed them in their house. They basically rolled out the story. And Colonel Hill, because he was OSS, because he was an interrogator, he was flown to Roswell within 24 hours after they discovered the wreckage. We don't know the exact time, but he's flown from Fort Worth, Dallas, Fort Worth, down to Roswell, New Mexico. And according to Colonel Hill, he tries to, one of the aliens, one of the bodies, they have 2 bodies. We get these numbers, different witnesses see different things, which is exactly what should happen in a real testimony like that. One witness sees 2, another witness sees 3, 3 bodies, whatever. So Colonel Hill sees 2 of the bodies, one's deceased, and he tries to make communication with the one that's alive. He can't do that. Carolyn asked him what was different about them. Large heads, black eyes. They had 6 fingers, not 5 like ours, and not 4 like a lot of what we see now. So something's going on here. The testimony is now in both films, Roswell Revisited, Exoneration, and Roswell Revisited in the debris field, where we actually go to the debris field. So the idea was that, and Tim Alberino's in the film also, and Tim states on the record that they got it right the first time. And the first time, obviously, was this.
I love that you have that. This is one of those skull moments, right? And this is so important, right? As LA, so
this is it.
Yeah, if you're listening to the show right now and you're not seeing what LA has, he's got the Roswell Daily Record, and the headline says RAAF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region. This is the headline the day after the crash, correct?
Well, we don't know when the crash actually occurred.
Okay,
it's around July 4th, and this is July 8th. So it's we don't know exactly when it hit, and different witnesses will say different things. But Mac Brazel, the rancher, getting ahead of myself, goes out on his ranch, and he's it's all free range cattle even today, and he sees this debris field, which is like 300 foot, 3 football fields, and it just goes on and on and on. He gathers up some of it. He comes back. Basically, he tells the sheriff. The sheriff calls the 509th Bombing Group, which at that time was the only nuclear bombing group on the planet. And Jesse Marcel Sr., who's the base's intelligence officer, really smart guy. He's the guy that's dispatched to go check it out. So he does. He goes out with Mac Brazel. They come back. This is why it's July 8th. So they come back. They look at all the stuff, the Roswell Daily Record. They print the story. This is July 9th.
Yeah, so this is the next one. If you're listening, it says that essentially the General Ramey empties the Roswell saucer. So we have 2 days of headline news.
Right here.
Is that a real print?
No. It's a replica. The real print is just like, buku.
Yeah, I was like, what? You better put that in a card case. Get that rated by Beckett or whatever.
So the deal is, Jesse Marcel Sr., the intelligence officer, is trotted out to this bogus press conference. General Ramey, has switched the material unbeknownst to Jesse Marcel Sr. Marcel Sr. is trotted out, and there's this wreckage of a weather balloon. Marcel Sr. was around weather balloons. He was trained. I mean, it's just like the whole cover story is so bogus. There was a film out a number of years ago, Roswell was a weather balloon. Another guy, and these guys are well-intentioned, but do your homework. I mean, really, go talk to some of the witnesses like we did. Dig them up, no pun intended, because most of them have passed away.
Right, yeah.
Jesse Marcel Jr.'s widow is still alive. His daughter is still alive. We have a clip of Jesse Marcel Sr. in the debris field saying that, when I was trotted out in that room with General Ramey, it's not what I do. I wasn't a spokesperson, and that's where Ramey concocts this whole story that it's a weather balloon. They had it right with the first print, and they deliberately lied and obfuscated the truth from the American people. And this is why, at some point, they have to come clean. So in our film, Roswell Revisited, Exonerated, the whole purpose of the film is to exonerate the Marcel name. That's the whole purpose of the film. And that's why Linda Marcel, first time she's ever come on the record, Denise Marcel, Jesse Marcel Jr.'s daughter, the granddaughter of Marcel Sr., Jesse Marcel Jr.'s best friend. And he's just an amazing man. He's the guy that actually is running the Jesse Marcel Jr. Memorial Library way up in Montana, and Dr. O'Connor. And so we interviewed him, at the library. And it's just an amazing film, because what it does is it shows the flip side. No one's ever done a film like this, to the best of my knowledge, where you're bringing all these witnesses in that are trying to exonerate the Marcel name. Because what some of these other researchers, by doing what they do and not doing their homework, with all due respect, but these people have never interviewed Marcel Jr. or Linda Marcel or Denise or the good doctor, and they've never gone to the debris field. They've never talked to other witnesses that have corroborating testimony. And so they paint the picture of Marcel as some sort of, he was looking for, some sort of a pat on the back or notoriety. Maybe he was drunk. Maybe he was this. Maybe he was that. Who knows? That's not the case at all. This man was a highly trained, extremely intelligent, absolutely incredible. And to think for 1 second that he would mistake a weather balloon Even if it was mogul, it's still a balloon. Hello,
Right,
for some
right.
sort of exotic material is beyond the pale. But then we've got, not only do we have Jim and Carolyn Rankins, so now we have Colonel Hill, who's there. Did Hill know Ramey or Mars? They didn't ask those questions. So we don't know what the relationship of Colonel Hill might have been with Ramey and the others. The bottom line is this. I've been to the debris field. We were there. We went out with Chuck Zukowski, who's an incredible researcher, cattle mutilation guy, been doing it forever, and Frank Kimbler. And Frank is a metallurgist and a geologist, among other things. Definitely a geologist. Metallurgy, that's sort of like a hobby thing with him. So we're out there in the debris field with 2 metal detectors.
Wow.
And there's those balloons. Gotta love it. I have no idea why my computer does this. There's certain gestures. If I do this,
Like two.
yeah, I mean, it's just like wacky. Balloons come up, thumbs up, stuff.
It's always
like
a
this.
party, LA. It's always a party.
What can I tell you? And I don't know how to turn it off, but it does it on all my interviews now. So, okay, maybe somebody else is, I don't know what's going on, but I mean, we're out in the debris field. This is the second film. And first of all, it's in the middle of nowhere. I mean, and when I say in the middle of nowhere, you drive from Roswell on a 4-lane highway for like 45 minutes. You're already like way outside. Then you make a left turn on this 2-lane country road. You're on that for at least 30, 35 minutes. Then you make another left turn on a gravel road with cattle gates, and it's free range cattle. And, you'll be driving along. You got to stop the car while, 4 or 5 cattle come across the road. There's nothing. There's absolutely nothing. It is one of the most desolate places. It's free range. There's nothing out there. Nothing out there at all. A couple of cattle gates every now and then. Then you make another left turn, and you have to open up a cattle gate. Now you're 4-wheeling. And you go up like this, and there's a sign. There used to be a sign, debris field, but the sign was torn down. But Frank knows where it is. And we're there. We're in the debris field basically for 4 or 5 hours, and we filmed there and interviewed. But what was interesting with the metal detectors, and let me preface it by saying this, Frank Kimbler has been out to the field numerous times, and he knows what the metal looks like. He's had the metal tested, and so when we're out there and he gets a hit on the metal detector, it's all on film. We go running over, and on film, we show him digging up down about 4 to 6 inches. There's something down there, a little pile of dirt, and he's sifting through the dirt, going up to the metal detector, nothing there. Gets another one, nothing there. Third time, beep. Now he knows it's in his hand. So he goes like this and pours a little bit in this hand. And he goes to the metal detector. Nope. So now he knows it's here. And he takes out a little bit more. And sure enough, there's a little piece of metal about the size of my little finger, pinky, thumbnail, right there. And it's folded in on itself. Under a microscope, it shows some sort of something very traumatic happened to the metal. It shows a high degree of temperature, of heat was applied to it. The metal is folded up. Under a scanning electron microscope, it shows what looks like microscopic holes in the metal. So when you shoot a bullet in a piece of wood, it blows out the back, right? That's how this metal looks. It's got a nice clean hole in the front, but the back is blown out. And we've had it tested at 2 different labs, one lab in Colorado, the other lab in New Mexico, and both labs place it as an aluminum alloy in the 6000 series. So what does that mean to you and me? Well, that aluminum alloy wasn't invented until 1953. So why is it buried 6 inches in the debris field? Number one. Number two, the alloy is not a direct match. The closest thing that we have to it is the aluminum alloy 6000 series, but it's not an exact match. So where does it come from and what is it? And then we've got eyewitnesses that come on the record that talk about the craft was about 100 feet wide and it came down like this, clipped the top off the pine trees and then landed. The craft probably broke up in 2 pieces. The debris field where Jesse Marcel was Sr., Jesse Marcel Sr., and the debris field, that is where the craft hit the first time. And so there's wreckage. That's why it's skidding and it comes back up. And then miles away is where the actual craft was. And then the bodies were found. We also went to Hangar 84. That's in the film. We are in Hangar 84. And the only reason why we got to do that is because I have learned over the years, you got to press the envelope. You got to just go for it. So we're on the outskirts of Hangar 84. Everything's locked up. There's a chain link fence all the way around it. But there's a guy smoking a cigarette by the chain link fence. I go over. I say, excuse me, we're from California. We're a really small film crew. We're making a documentary on Roswell. Is there any chance we can get in here and look inside? He goes, yeah, come up to the front of the building. We'll talk to the manager. So we all go running up. Now we're inside. They've let us inside the anteroom. And I'm on the phone with the director. The guy's name is Bull. Bull comes down about 20 minutes later, ushers us into the conference room, and we interviewed him on camera. And then I say, can we go in and take a look at the hangar? Yeah, let's go take a look. And we're standing inside Hangar 84, which is exactly the way it looked in 1947. Yeah, there's been maintenance and all that, but essentially it's exactly the same hangar where the crash wreckage was taken from a debris site and stored, as well as the bodies that were under a tarp.
Wow.
So the UFO is about 100 feet wide, you're saying, in the crash site. How many pieces do you think there was of this?
We don't know. We don't know that. We know that the craft broke apart and disintegrated. Jesse Marcel Jr., that debris field was like 3 football fields. He said you could pick up the metal and it was like thin, like paper thin, but you couldn't dent it. You could roll it up in a ball and it would spread out like water again to its original shape, but you couldn't dent it. You couldn't do anything with it. So this is why the explosion is unbelievable. There's also the craft, the center of the craft. Allegedly, that was retrieved, and the affidavit from I think it's Colonel Hout, which we show in the film, talks about that the egg-shaped craft was about 16 feet by 14 feet and about 6 feet high, roughly. That's an egg-shaped type of a thing, and that he did see at Hangar 84. And he saw the bodies under a tarp. You could tell they were bodies, but that's all in an affidavit. You can go online. One of the interesting things that we show in the film is a telegram that General Ramey is holding. So General Ramey is holding a telegram kind of like this in his hand. And the photographer is probably 20 feet away. So it's kind of a wide shot. There's Ramey holding a telegram. Jesse Marcel Sr. is next to him, and Ramey's holding this telegram. Well, Ramey's thinking, no one can read this because it's 1947. Now enter David Rudiak a while back, but not too far back. And Rudiak's got the computers, and he blows this thing up. And here in the verbiage, obviously this is a prop, it says crash disk, retrieve bodies, disc, Wright Patterson, actually right field. It wasn't called Wright Pat, just right field. So that's the work of David Rudiak, and we show the telegram in the film. And the whole purpose of the film, both films, one, it exonerates the Marcel name, hopefully. Number two, it shows without a doubt that something did crash there, and there was a deliberate cover-up. But the fact that we went out to the debris field and we found 2 pieces of the wreckage. Yeah. Okay. There it is again. Thank you. I appreciate that. It's right on cue.
That's so great, dude.
It's hysterical. And I don't know how to turn it off. I don't know how to turn it off. I wish I did.
Those are weather balloons. So no big deal.
Yeah, those are weather balloons. Exactly.
LA, I have a couple questions for you. How many civilians saw the crash wreckage first? Do we know of? And how many days did it take from the crash till government people got there? I'm sure there's a lot of people, some randos saw this wreckage before the official story started to come out.
They did. They did. And people, there are witnesses that saw, remember, there's two sites. It's a skip site. And we actually show that from the White Sands where the craft comes in like this. You see the craft and it comes in, hits the ground, goes up again, then dives back in. And when it hits here the second time, it just explodes. So what you're looking at, the reason why they didn't get the metal, they didn't get all the metal, is because if our hypothesis is correct, when that thing exploded, those little shards of metal, which we're finding, which we found too, it's like a bullet out of a 22. It's just bam, right into the ground. So even though the Army's out there shoulder to shoulder on their hands and knees picking up the wreckage, and how do we know that? Because Frank Kimbler found three buttons that are aluminum that were issued between 1940 and 1950, which come from Army military fatigue. So what are they doing? If there's nothing to see, if we're just a weather balloon, why are there buttons that he's finding on the ground? Because people are going shoulder to shoulder on their hands and knees picking up the wreckage, but they didn't get it all. And look, this is science. Right. The machine could care less what I believe or what I'm trying to prove. It's an aluminum alloy from a 6000 series, and it's not an exact match. And that aluminum alloy was not created until 1953. So unless somebody's got a time machine, not buying it. Not buying it.
Elliot, I want to ask you, man, because I mean, this is the second film. No, I got a DeLorean. We're gonna go back. You know, you and I. We'll put Albarino in there. We'll throw him in the hatch. We'll throw Albarino in the hatchback. Yeah, I have a '71 Bronco. That's not going to go anywhere. It only time travels in my garage. No, but this is the second film on Roswell, and I want to know like what your best hypothesis of what actually happened, because what appears to have happened based upon all this is that there was craft recovered and it was covered up. I just you know, a couple things. Do you think this is the first time that we recovered, we say the U.S. as a government recovered craft? It's obviously the most famous, right, because of the coverage that came out that was legit before it was covered up, right? But I'm just like your thoughts on the collection, because we're at a time now, right? This year especially, this last year in 2023, where we had whistleblowers with the House Oversight Committee that came out, and we had whistleblowers that Grush came out and said that we've recovered craft, you know, and plural, right? And non-human biologics, right?
We use that in the film.
And so I'm just like, in your mind, what's your best sort of summary of what you think went down, and you know what you perhaps think that the government did with, you know, or the Air Force or whoever it may be that got a hold of this did with the things they had?
Eisenhower warns us that the military-industrial complex, and you know, people can just Google that and watch his speech. He warns us about the military-industrial complex. That military-industrial complex is in control, in my opinion, and they put the kibosh on this whole Roswell event. Jesse Marcel Sr. was a patsy, was a cover-up. That's what he was. So they've known about it. Bob Lazar talked about this in the 90s, working on the sports model. Eisenhower, more than likely, when he goes and gets his teeth drilled or the emergency dental thing and he's gone for 24 hours.
Right.
Like, you know, sorry. You know, the Holloman Air Force Base, did he meet with them? In my opinion, he did. All this will come out eventually because it's starting to come out. The fact that David Grush, we actually show this clip where Representative Mace goes to David Grush, well, you know, did they collect the crash? Yes. Can you tell us anything about it? No, I can't. But, you know, who's got them? I can't tell you that either. Well, were their bodies recovered? Yes, they were biologics. Were they human or non-human? They were non-human. I mean, you know, that is one of the most astounding admonitions on anybody from anywhere that I've ever heard. And people were so numb and just so asleep that they don't understand the just profound implications of that. And so the question is, it's a dog and pony show that we're seeing. Remember, Grush himself has not seen any of this. It's secondhand information. But, you know, so everything's compartmentalized. So nobody goes to jail because Everything's compartmentalized.
Right.
So he can tell you what he believes is the truth under oath. The question is, what is the truth? Do they have biologics? In my opinion, absolutely. Those biologics were flown up to Wright Pat. I had a woman that came up to me years ago at a conference who said a friend of hers was active duty at Wright Pat, and there was an area, this is in the film also, there was an area that was quadrant off, always under guard, and a very heavy smell of like a formaldehyde was always present in the air. But the area was always under guard. Nobody got in, nobody got out. Roswell was a cover-up. They've back-engineered the craft. They've known about it. It's nothing new. And there's a hypothesis that I came up with years ago, and it's I actually stated it at the Prophecy Watchers conference, and in my opinion, I may be the first person on the planet to ever put this out. Nobody else that I'm aware of has ever stated it, because they never look. Most other researchers, especially on the other side of the aisle, don't embrace the biblical narrative.
Right.
And without embracing the biblical prophetic narrative, it's hard to get to the truth. So we know this. Here's my proof text. So Jesus is casting out the demons from the man of the tombs.
Right.
And we all know the story. The demons, can we go into the pigs? Yeah, you can go into the pigs. So they possess the pigs go crazy, they go off the cliff, and they all drown. But one of the head demons, we are legion for we are many, says this: what have you to do with us before the time?
Right.
Why have you come to torment us before the time? That phrase has stuck with me for years, and it's pregnant with meaning. How do they know that it's not the time? How do they know that?
Yeah.
How can they make a statement like that? Have you come to torment us before the time? What does that mean? What time are they talking about? The time when they are put into the abyss,
right.
when they're finally
Judgment.
in torment,
Yeah.
judgment, and they know it's coming. The second one, proof text, is when Michael and his angels fight with the devil and his angels, and the dragon, Satan the devil, is cast down to earth. Woe to the inhabitants of earth, because your adversary, the devil, has been cast to earth, and he knows his time is short. So is it possible they know that some nuclear event, that's what they're looking for? So when Nagasaki and Hiroshima happen, we get the Foo Fighters, we get this huge flap, 1947, Kenneth Arnold even before that. I mean, there's all this stuff going on with all of ufology. Is it possible that they know that the time of their revealing is after a nuclear event? They're waiting for a nuclear, there's a thumbs up. They're waiting for a nuclear event. Is that what's going on here?
Interesting.
And so we know from Robert Salas, the Watchers series, our Watchers series, the late, my business partner, the late Richard Shaw, and we did like 11 films together. And we actually interviewed Robert Salas. Now he's on the talk shows and all this other stuff. But Salas was the base commander at the Maelstrom base up in Montana. And I think there were 10 intercontinental ballistic missiles which were taken offline by a 60-foot UFO,
right.
which was right over the craft. So is it possible that they know that the time of their revealing is after or around some sort of a nuclear event? If that's true, then it makes sense why they're flying around near the 509th Bombing Group, because the 509th Bombing Group in Roswell, New Mexico, was the only base with nukes That was it. Even though they didn't have one at the time, that was it. So, I mean, you start connecting the dots and you kind of go, maybe that's why they're there. Then there's a heavy electrical storm that night. The thing is hit and down it goes.
Interesting. And, what's funny is that, I mean, there's a lot of, in ufology, there's a lot of stories about UFOs turning off nuclear sites and essentially deactivating these, right? And you wonder why, right? And what you hear, right, especially from the maybe the preferred narrative when it comes to the non-biblical lens in ufology is that right? It's that story you'll hear. Oh, they're just protecting us from ourselves. They're going to step in at the time to we actually had somebody just try to lay this out and tell us this is how it is on early in our show days, saying, oh, they're here, they're behind the scenes, they're benevolent. It's this whole deception as far as I'm concerned. But it's fascinating though. The idea that we're looking down the barrel at some nuclear event that in some ways it's going to be a trigger, if you will, for maybe the veil being lifted. That's fascinating. I actually had never heard that. So I think it's a really interesting hypothesis because
it is, yeah.
Because you start the implications of that, right? Is these some kind of nuclear holocaust, and of course that's always been a scare. Since we were kids. I remember we grew up in California, Nate, you and I. There was the talk of earthquake, get under your desk, and then I remember even early on that if there's a nuclear strike, it's the big joke now. It's memed everywhere. You get under your desk, right? And that's going to do anything, but
yeah, what are you going to do with that?
Well, especially during the Cold War. Right, which is a little before us, Nate, but not too much far before us there, because we were early '80s kids. But this is a reality there. They're kind of prepping you for.
And what are we looking at now? The nations of the world. I mean, Iran is trying to get a bomb, and they will use it. The moment they have it, they're going to use it.
North Korea has one. Yeah.
North Korea's got several of them.
Pakistan's got it. I mean, they've got them. They're all.
What are we looking at? What are we? And the saber rattling between Ukraine and Russia and some of the powers. I mean, it's just like if we lost our minds here. The fact that they're even talking about using a tactical nuke or any nuke at all for anything. But I honestly think that's when they show up. And the reason for this is we are now, the globe is connected. The entire globe is connected because of the internet. We are wired together in ways that are unprecedented in all of human history. If you have a nuclear event going off on this planet, it will create the greatest climate of fear that mankind has ever experienced collectively. It's not Hiroshima, where people are reading stuff and it's not global, it's days later, and here's a picture. No. The satellites are beaming right down. Here's the aftermath. This is what's going on. And everybody's freaked out. That's when they show up.
Do you think that's part of the, if we're talking, prophecy, biblical prophecy, all of us here subscribe to the biblical worldview and the idea that, that the prophecy has already been laid out. And we know that according to the book of Revelation, that the Antichrist is going to bring a time of peace. And so in order to have this time of peace, you have to have some sort of insane time of the antithesis of that, right? Of war.
And that's where we are.
And that's interesting. That's so interesting, LA. I think it's based upon because I think what people miss sometimes in all this, and this is what I think that you and our friend Timothy Alberino are so well versed in, is that there are decades and decades of data when it comes to ufology and to the recording and the stories and the sightings and all of the above, right? That you can draw upon to sort of supplement a lot of the things the stuff that we're seeing now, right? And so there's this whole backdrop and foundation of that, which I really think kind of rounds out the picture. Because when you look at that, you go, hey, listen, this is what's been going on. These things are showing up. People are saying they're turning off nuclear sites. This is what's going on. And now we have this, we're on the precipice of disclosure with, everything that's happened, House oversight, all the FOIA Act stuff. And then the fact that you said, well, the most important thing I think in all of this too, is what you just said, is the interconnectedness and the way that communication travels now in this age, in this day, is you cannot, like you could in the days of Roswell, sort of just bait and switch and have now the channels, the 2 channels or the 5 channels you have on TV and the 1 newspaper or 5 newspapers you have out carry the same story, and that's it, right? And then that's all you've got. Now you've got, this is the same thing with creatures. We end up in the creature lane here a lot on our show, LA, but because everyone has a phone in their pocket now with a camera on it, and
Exactly.
and that's all connected to the internet, you can't put a lid on this stuff in the way that you could before. And it's a really interesting, I really like that hypothesis, because it's when you look at World War II, as you said, the event in Japan with the dropping of Fat Boy and what is the other bomb? Little
something, yeah.
Little Boy and Fat Man. I'm gonna butcher this, but the two atomic bombs, right? Then you do have this uptick in UFO activity that we didn't see maybe since the event in the 1500s in Nuremberg, right, or 1600s in Nuremberg when they had the event in the skies. But that's really interesting.
I want to ask you, LA, a couple questions. Do you think that this specific UFO explodes? Because I remember listening to some of the testimony, especially from Bob Lazar, when he said that some of the reactors inside exploded when they were trying to cut into them and such. Do you think that this thing hits the ground and it explodes because whatever it's powering this thing, it's disrupted, and then it just creates there's just shards all over the place that you're able to find to this day? And why do you think why do you think they crash? I mean, if this is advanced tech, thousands of years beyond, why does it crash?
This is the hypothesis, a conjecture on my part. If it got struck by lightning, and allegedly it did, that messed with everything. It messed with its whole navigational system. It threw the whole thing into a tizzy. But that's conjecture. We don't know. And then it gets into the thing, if it's not alien, then why do fallen angels need a UFO to fly around?
Right.
It just, and the problem is we can't sit down with a fallen angel and go, hey, it's Ellie Marzulli here. I'm interviewing Beelzebub today. Beelzebub, why are you using craft like this? It's not going to happen.
Yeah, Shimiyaza. Although you're locked in the abyss, why are your pals flying around?
See, we've got this. The church at large has a very truncated view of the supernatural. There's a book I'm working on. It's called Technology, Supernatural Technology in the Bible. I'll just give you one example that we all know. So Adam and Eve are booted out of the garden, and the Most High God sends a couple of cherubim down to guard the east gate. So right there, we got a problem. Why only the east gate? Why not the north, south, and west gate? Doesn't say. So only the east gate needs guarding for whatever reason. So you got these 2 cherubim that are standing at the gate. That sounds like a really fun job to me. And just to keep Adam and Eve, just 2 people. But the part that everybody overlooks is this. In the center,
lightsaber.
There's a flaming sword. There's a lightsaber. There's a flaming sword, which in modern day vernacular is a lightsaber. Oh, seriously, oh my God, LA's lost his marble. No, I haven't. It's a flaming sword that turns every which way. That, my friends, a flaming sword, that's called a lightsaber in modern day vernacular. And that's technology. That's supernatural technology that's found in our Bible. And it's time for the church to understand that technology is there. The book of Enoch tells us that one of the angels came down and shows the art of weapon making, albeit it's primitive weapon making. But how does it know about forges and metallurgy? See, we have this, snap my finger, there's a ballpoint pen. Wow, it's supernatural. Yeah, okay, I get that. But on the other hand, we see technology, and it's there. And that's the basis of the book. It's really a fun book to write about. I've had some.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time with Tim talking about, practicality and put these things in practical terms. Angels are probably closer to humans than maybe any Christian has ever. And they might have to travel from point A to point B, and we've argued that. And there's biblical stories where it seems like angels are getting held up and can't get from one place to the other, and that is
Daniel's a perfect example of that.
Yeah.
How do they fight? And why is it that the guardian, the prince of the power of the air, Prince of Persia, how does he block? And are there reinforcements? I mean, how do they fight? Can they be wounded? In my opinion, they can be wounded. They can't be killed, but they can be wounded. I think that's conjecture.
Do you believe that, like, let's say Gabriel's flying around and shoots down this Roswell craft? Why couldn't that happen? You think that happens?
Well, it's that's a really interesting point. It's a really interesting point, and I wouldn't dismiss that. You see, we just don't know. We don't have all the answers. But circling back to the films, what we do have, and I think what we've gone out of our way to prove in both films, is that the Marcel family lived with this shadow over them. And that's why we call the film Exoneration, because we exonerate them, in our opinion.
So let me ask this real quick. I know this is going to be covered in the film, but like for my curiosity, when the wreckage is swapped out for the weather balloon, Marcel knows this happens, but he has to sort of toe the line. Is that what happens, or does he? Because he's seen if I'm following the timeline, he's already seen the real wreckage.
Yeah, he bought some of the wreckage and showed it to his wife and to his son, Jesse Marcel Jr. I interviewed Dr. Jesse Marcel Jr. I interviewed him before he passed away. And see, this is what drives me nuts about some of these other guys that have created, films or reports on Roswell and say it's a weather balloon. My first question, well, how many witnesses have you talked to? Oh, we didn't talk to any witnesses. Oh, really? Well, how can you possibly come up with what you're saying until you talk to Jesse Marcel Jr. or his widow or his daughter or, something. You gotta go out in the field. You just can't sit in an armchair and take a bunch of stuff off the internet and say, well, it was a weather balloon, when everything is saying, no, it wasn't a weather balloon. That's the cover story. So Marcel Sr. is holding the weather balloon, looking at General Ramey like, you've got to be kidding me. I mean, the expression on his face says it all. I'm a student of body language. It's like, this isn't what we saw. And Marcel Sr., we show this clip in the film where he looks at the camera and says, but Ramey and I both knew different. Ramey and I both knew differently.
Do you believe that like Spielberg's Taken series? I remember watching his Taken series, and it very much sounded like
it's the real deal. Completely, 100%. From the only way we differ is where the little girl in the last several films in the last several installments in the series, okay, and she's able to stop space and time. Okay, so there's an alien connection. She's a hybrid. That's the Antichrist. The only difference is it's not a little girl; it's a little boy, and there's the connection. Everything about the abduction, the implants, the government cover-up, it is 100% right on. And I've watched it several times. I actually have the DVD. Where do you think he got the information from?
just like the X-Files, they just stole it from real events, and then they like created a TV show. And I think I think part of that is to dismiss. Is that why they create this stuff? They just to get you to think that it's tabloid, but it's actually the truth, and so you believe that the truth is actually the tabloids, and then the tabloids are the truth.
Yeah, I mean that's where we are, and what it does is it desensitizes the public so much that nobody cares. A perfect example of that is Tucker Carlson, which was the gateway to conservative Christian worldview. I mean, we all watched it. That's why when they gave him the boot, everybody just we love you, Tucker. We're not going anywhere. But Tucker Carlson broke the story with Commander David Fravor, 2017. What did you see? Whatever this was, Fravor says, whatever this was not from this earth. That's groundbreaking. And now we've got Grush saying we have, retrieved biologics, which are non-human. And because everyone is so desensitized, right? Nobody cares. I mean, very few people understand what it is we are looking at. and how this ties into what I call the coming great deception, because it is the coming great deception. It will change everything on this planet when they show up. Everything changes.
Actually, that's a good segue, though. I have a quick question on this, because you mentioned something I thought was interesting on the non-human biologics, right? That the eyewitness reports from Roswell was a six fingers is the paradactyly, right? You have this, which honestly is associated with the Nephilim when we think
Nephilim,
about
right.
sort of the ancient history of this.
Yeah.
But it differs in some ways, and you made a mention of this, to what the anecdotal accounts are now of some of the entity alien type creatures people are encountering. So what do you think the difference is there then, or what do you think is going on there, where you have sort of this different in digits between what was allegedly, or supposedly reported as being recovered at Roswell versus kind of some of the things that are happening now, as far as people are reporting, with 4 digits on some of the grays, et cetera. Yeah.
Again, it's conjecture.
Right.
The dragon has been playing around with the human genome from the beginning. When you look, and the Lord just gave me this a couple of months back, but when Joshua and Caleb are ready to go into the promised land, they have the 12 tribes of Israel. So it is the facing off of the seed war. The seed of the dragon, the offspring of a dragon, will be at war with the offspring of the woman. Well, guess what? The offspring of the woman, the proto-evangelion Messiah, isn't there yet. But one of those 12 tribes is going to be responsible for the virgin who will bear the Messiah. But the dragon still doesn't know what tribe it is. Well, you've got the 12 tribes of Israel, and then you've got the Nephilim tribes, the tribes of the dragon in the promised land, and they go at it. They go at it. It's the seed war. It's the culmination of the seed war. And we know that there seems to be different genetic attributes to these Nephilim tribes. Anakim means long necks. The Zamzumim, the buzzing ones. So these names point possibly to certain genetic characteristics. He's messing with the genome, and that's what's going on in modernity. Nothing's changed in thousands of years. He's playing with stuff. It's like in the Lord of the Rings, the Uruk-hai. It's the same type of thing, where Saruman is creating something, trying to create the ultimate warrior. And we've heard this with super soldiers and all this other stuff. The dark side is gearing up to the Battle of Armageddon. It knows it's going to happen. So it's trying to pull everything it can to somehow change the outcome, but it can't, because we know from Colossians that the Lord holds everything together. He's before all things, and he holds all things together. More conjecture from my part. When he rides in with the armies of heaven, which is literal, they're all on flying white horses. Flying white horses. I can't wait.
Yeah.
Yeah. Behold, I saw heaven standing open, and there before me was a white horse, whose rider is faithful and true. With justice he judges and makes war. His eyes are like flaming fire. On his head is many crowns. He has a name written on him that no one but he himself knows. The armies of heaven rode with him on white horses, dressed in fine linen, white and clean. Guys, I was there 43 years ago for 3 seconds.
Wow.
I mean, not a vision. I mean, like Paul, I was taken. I was there on the white horse, on my white horse. I was holding on to its mane. No bridle, no saddle. I'm holding onto his mane. Second one, I'm looking at my hands, holding the mane. Second two, I look to my left. Way in the distance is the rider on the white horse. It's not like this. The armies are like this. It's a horseshoe shape. And the armies of heaven are stacked up like floors of a building. 1, 2, 5, 10, 20. This huge horse shape like this, horseshoe shape like this. And in the center of that horseshoe shape is the rider of the white horse. And the horses are staggered. Don't ask me how he does this. The horses are staggered so every eye can see him no matter what. We all are looking. We are riding down. So the second one, the hands on the horse's mane. Second two, there's the rider. Second three, I'm up on the right flank, somewhere in the throng, about 8 rows back from the front. And then I'm back. 3 seconds. 3 seconds.
Just think, man. Just keep getting those crowns. You might move up, and you might be two horses away.
Okay. But the point I'm trying to make, all he does is stops holding them all together.
Wow.
He just stops it. Out of his mouth comes that sharp sword, striking nations. He just undoes them. He just stops holding them together, and they just bleed out. And that's why the blood is up to a horse's. I don't think we're in there chopping our heads off like Lord of the Rings and orcs and all this stuff. I don't think that's what happens. I think it's just him. We watch him ride in, and that's it. He just stops holding them together, and they just basically wither right where they're standing. That's a conjecture.
That's. I mean, it makes sense though, right? If you have an infinite God, he doesn't.
He's had it.
When he's coming to bring judgment or to pass judgment, he doesn't need
justice.
He
Doesn't
need help. He doesn't need any help, right? Yeah.
No, he doesn't. He really doesn't.
Yeah.
But we get to watch.
And the enemy's trying to make the ultimate warrior, but that time has passed as well. When he teamed up with Randy Savage, they were the ultimate maniacs, and that was in the 80s, LA. So that's been passed.
I think that's the confusing part. You grow up in the church and you see a lot of war language coming from Christ's mouth, and he's dropping these war terms, and I bring a sword and other things, and you're just
yeah.
And the church loves to focus on sort of this. Oh, Jesus was a pacifist, and he you know what I mean? And it's like they don't pay attention to the
warrior king. Warrior king, because that's what he is.
Ellie, where do you think this metal comes from? These materials that they use to build these craft. I mean, they just sound like they're not from here. Sound like they're going and digging them up somewhere on Earth. Where are they coming from? Well,
I mean, this is where it gets, and we don't know. I mean, it's just conjecture.
Right. Sure.
On my part, when we tested the implant, which we took out, we're the only Christian ministry ever to take out an implant from a man who was abducted. That's Emil. He's in our 4th film on abductions. I mean, this is what I mean. Yeah. It's like we're out in the field, we're doing stuff, we're taking implants out, we're digging up pieces of the Roswell crash.
Tip of the spear, LA. Tip of the spear. I love it.
Some of the reason I'm asking you these questions is because Christians they have a hard time expanding their paradigm.
They do.
They think all of this is spiritual, and we try to argue a lot of times. There's metal. They're making things out of metal, guys.
Yeah,
metal and alloys we don't have at the time. So there's. I mean that if you reverse engineer that, right, that means there has to be forges, and they have to have acquired metal somehow.
I'll give you one more from the book, which I've stopped writing because the Lord's redirected my steps. But I'll get to it. I'll finish it. So one of the chapters is the Lord's sword. So when Joshua meets the commander of the Lord's army, right, the Lord's host, he's got a sword drawn, right? And take off your sandals. This is holy ground. So that's not an angel. Not an angel. That's Jesus. That's the Lord. So the question is, okay, there's the sword. Did the Lord just snap his finger and nice shiny sword comes out? Or was there a contest in the heavenly realm?
Yeah.
Was there a contest? Hey, I need a sword. I'm about to go down and do some stuff. I need a sword. There'll be a contest. Rewards will be great. And because we know that the angels, the fallen ones in the book of Enoch, teach metallurgy. We know that. Now, you can't trust the book of Enoch because it's like, please, we can at least appreciate the book's historicity. It is quoted in the book of Jude. So it was widely read. And if you were going to keep one book, Enoch 1, that's the book you keep out from Christians' hands because it tells you exactly what's going on. But metallurgy is shown to the people of the earth, albeit it's primitive. So what if, and here's just one more in the same idea. The New Jerusalem is 1,500 miles wide, 1,500 miles in length, 1,500 miles high. Do we have any idea how big that is? That's half the United States, but you go up. Is it a pyramid? Could be. People say, oh, it's a cube. You don't know that. It could be. It's either a cube or a pyramid. In my opinion, I think it's a pyramid, but I don't know. The bottom line is that thing has got anti-gravity. How does that work? And how do you engineer something that's got a floor span of 1,500 miles? How does that work? You know, who does the calcs for that? What kind of metal or material is this thing made out of? Yeah. But it's a construct. And so once we start looking at the biblical narrative, all of a sudden, all these chapters, I mean, I could go on, but I won't, because someone will steal the book, guaranteed. But I've got stuff that came across my desk from just some really cool stories about artifacts that were found and things like that. So there's technology in the Bible, and the church has got this truncated view, and we need to expand it.
Well, we've talked about that, Nate, a little bit, like with the idea of manna, right? Like we talked about this with I think with Tim, where you go, okay, it's the bread of heaven, right? So of course, God could snap his fingers and create bread, but if you reverse engineer that, then you have to have grain and have grown grain, and then you've had to thresh it and grind it and add a little yeast and bake it, right? That's how you make bread, right? And so there's, I think you're on the nose, right? That we have this idea, and it's great. I think whimsy is important when it comes to understanding the supernatural world and not being caught up in everything is black and white and can be empirically measured. Number one, but I also think that you need to look at things for what they are and go, things just it's like the poof theory, right? Like these things just poof and angels just poof wherever they want. And we actually talked to an exorcist on the show from the Catholic Church, and he's like, well, angels are ethereal, they can be wherever they want. And I go, you read Daniel 9 and 10, because that isn't true. And in fact, and then Jacob wrestled with one, so that isn't too ethereal, right? And so
there goes that paradigm,
right? But I mean, I think that's what you're talking about. Not to like, you're in the technology space, but you look at all these things, right? Heaven's got walls and roads, and and you go, okay, there's a lot going on here that has a physicality, and so then when you're looking at things like you're digging up pieces of wreckage that are not foil from a weather balloon.
No.
And they're not alloys that existed before 1953, even though the crash happened in the 40s. You go, oh, there's stuff here, and it doesn't match the 6000s anyway. It doesn't even match the things that we did. There's no match to it.
Yeah. It's close, but it's no cigar. And I got to get going here. Folks, if you're interested, lamarzulli.net, that's the website. You can download things and watch them, buy the DVDs, 13 books, 29 films. So there's quite a corpus there.
It's quite the quiver of films, if you will. And the most latest is the second Roswell film, and it's exoneration of the Marcel family. So, L.A. Marzulli, it's always a pleasure. We're grateful for your time, grateful for you being on the show. If we acquire pieces of said pieces of said craft, we'll call the balloons in, and we'll get you on the ground, because that is
Thanks,
amazing.
Guys.
Be good,
Love
Elliot.
To come back. God
so
bless
great
you
to
guys.
see you, brother. Yes, sir.
Yeah, really fun hanging out.
All righty. Great to see you,
Take
Elliot.
care.
See you,
Bye.
brother.